Welcome back to MediaScience MYTH BUSTING. I'm your host, Philip Lomax, and I'm joined by Dr. Dwayne Varan. On today's episode, we're going to be discussing the myth that bigger is better for digital. So Dr. Varan, please give us some context for this research question.
Yeah, that's a great point, Philip. So it's logical to think that bigger is better. If you have a bigger ad, that's going to perform better than a smaller ad. When you think about this, if you will, in the world of print advertising, for example, if you had a full page ad in the paper, surely that would do better than if you had a half page or a quarter page or even smaller. So it's understandable why the perception is there, but we're going to show you some data that says that that perception can often be wrong. And so that's the reason why it's always important to actually test your assumptions and not just move to accepting them without that kind of critical scrutiny.
And this is a research question that we got to test with our good friends at Kargo, who offer a lot of different types of ad formats across screens. So Dr. Varan, what did we find in this particular initiative?
Yeah, so as you say, Kargo has a number of different ad formats, and today we're going to look specifically at a couple of formats that they offer in mobile. And so one of those formats is the dreaded interstitial. So the interstitial is a full screen takeover. It's basically the ad over the entire screen that occurs. And usually what the viewer is doing is searching desperately for the X button or the countdown clock to get out of the interstitial ad. So that's one format. But even though people would, I think, acknowledge that it might be a little bit intrusive and that people don't inherently like it, because we know we don't like it, I think that the assumption would be, though, that it must be very effective. Even if you don't like it, you're seeing it for sure. It's full screen. It's there in your face. And so the assumption is it must be effective on some level. And we're going to compare that to the other extreme here, an ad format which Kargo calls Sidekick. And Sidekick is a tiny ad unit. It's a little bug, basically, for the advertiser that occurs in the bottom right-hand side of the screen. And so here you have a David and Goliath kind of like thing. You would expect that the interstitial, even though it might be annoying, would deliver significantly more ad impact to the Sidekick, which is tiny and small. Now, let's start with the eye tracking data. When we look at the eye tracking data, the interstitial is delivering in terms of how long a person actually looks at the ad, on average 2.5 seconds. And they will look at the ad 2 times, so almost 2 times. They're looking back and forth to see the ad. Now that 2.5 seconds, I will say, a lot of that is actually people actually fixating on where the exit button is so they can figure out how to get out of the ad. By way of contrast, the Sidekick, in terms of visual attention, is actually getting viewer attention for 3.09 seconds. And it's doing that over 6 times. And so on the visual attention data, what we are seeing here is that the Sidekick is getting significantly higher visual attention than the full screen ad. Now that's really fascinating, right? That's really interesting. But now let's look at what the effect is on memory. And so here what we see is that the interstitial is getting 11% recall, and the Sidekick is getting 17% recall. And so here, without a doubt, the Sidekick is significantly outperforming the interstitial. And so there really is very clear evidence here that bigger is not better, that in actual fact, we need to study and test our ad formats. So we have to say that the Sidekick is the winner when it comes to these different ad formats.
Wow, Dwayne. There are certainly a lot of implications to this insight that you found. And immediately what comes to mind for me is you can't just assume that something's going to work better than other products. So you have to test them.
100%. In our business, an assumption is dangerous because sometimes the assumption will hold, but sometimes it won't. And until we test, we won't really know what the real effect is.
You heard it here first. Another great episode of MediaScience MYTH BUSTING. So Dr. Varan, the myth that bigger is better, especially when it comes to digital, what say you?
Busted!
Join us again for our next episode. And until then, I'm your host, Philip Lomax, and I'm joined by Dr. Dwayne Varan. And thank you, our audience.